Okay, great. Welcome everyone. Tonight's a little bit of a different concept where it's more an open forum discussion where we've got a chance to impact potentially future rules which could go into the FAI rulebook. It is something that I have had mulling away in the back of my brain for about 18 months. This sort of alternative or development of the flying only class. But I thought it was about time that I actually put it down on paper. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we go into it. This is being recorded, so if anyone does not wish their face to be seen at various points when we go in the questions and everything, then please just turn off your camera for when they eventually go on to YouTube. Okay, right. Paul, do you want to say a couple of words just before you said you wanted a few sentences just before I start?
Yeah, it's just a little bit about since most of the subcommittees actually on the meeting is quite interesting. But the thing is that what the idea that you had on doing such a presentation as this is like, it's very, very good for the subcommittee to get some inputs from others than just inside the subcommittee. So therefore, when we discuss rules, it's also good that we have different views on things. That's my first view on it. The second, when you talked about the new class that you're going to present, it's like we have talked also inside the subcommittee about F4G, because F4G is actually been pretty close to non-existing class the last, I think 2014 it was what we came to 4 competitors in the World Championship.
Yep.
Then to say it's not yet the World Champion class, it's a provisional class, but still it is a class that can be used to attract even more people to a World Championships. I will later speak on what I think about it, but I think it's the best way is to present your view on it first. And I think it's good for the subcommittee to hear other views than just what's inside the subcommittee. And then later on we can discuss more about also your proposal or idea and also the other classes, because I think it's good for the subcommittee to get some inputs from other than the subcommittee. What can we do better? What can we change? Is there something that is a problem? Is there something we can do simpler or even more complicated? I mean, all inputs are good inputs, I think. So first of all, I think it's nice to hear your idea, and after that, I think it's a good idea to compare a little the difference, but what's in the sporting code right now compared to what you have put up as an idea.
Cool. Thank you, Paul. Roger, do you mind sharing the presentation now? Okay. There we go, as I just reorganize my screen. So that was actually that picture was taken of Paul and I. It was a year ago tomorrow, I think it was, Paul, when you came across to the UK to do your little trip and tour at the end of last year.
Yeah, time moves quickly.
Yeah, it does. It moves very quickly. Okay, next slide, please, Roger. Oh. Okay, so all across the world, there are numerous RC scale classes. A lot of them have sort of common elements. So where I've judged at Top Gun in the US, in Brazil, in Greece, at World Championships, and the UK, all of them have sort of like a common elements. It's all just like little nuances, which are maybe specific to the countries themselves, or specific to weight limits. So the only thing that varies really is the weighting between static and flight. F4C, the sort of premier class, you've got 50-50 weighting between static and flight. F4G, which is actually just a heavier version of F4C, again the 50-50. And then F4H, which is currently, is it 2-1, Paul, or is it 3-1?
Yeah. 2-1.
2-1 in favour of flight.
Yeah.
So the FAI classes are the worldwide sort of standard, and we'll say probably 60-70% of the scale competing nations around the world fly the FAI classes. Some of the individual countries, of which we are one, the UK, we have slight variations, and then of course in the US they have. The US is quite complicated, Mike, because you've got Scale Masters rules, AMA rules, and also Top Gun rules, and they're all very slightly different. But as I say, the FAI classes are the worldwide standard. Why I've sort of like started to look at this is the F4C, it takes a particular breed of person to build an F4C model. It takes numerous years, and with the current crop of people who are coming into scale, because they've come the ARF route, etc., then they don't have that sort of like built up in their psyche yet to actually commit to go forward and spend so many years building a model. F4H, simplified static, and it has resulted in increased participation at the World Champs. But we need a new population. We need to ensure that the Scale World Championships will continue like way into the future. So this is where I'd started to think about how Top Gun, being a very successful event, which I've judged that for 7 years, there is a whole population there of flyers who are willing to travel overseas, who want to travel overseas, but there's not an FAI competition class which suits the majority of them. Next slide, Roger. Okay, so this is just an extract from the FAI rulebook, or the CAM rulebook. What is F4G? It basically is exactly the same as F4C, except where F4C has a weight limit of 15 kilos, F4G has a weight limit of 20 kilos, excluding fuel, but the maximum takeoff weight cannot exceed 25 kilos. And the reason why that is in there, which is different from all the other, different from the other classes, and the maximum is stipulated, is because that's part of the general rules within FAI. Next one, Roger. Static, exactly the same criteria as F4C. So this is where I was really thinking that F4G doesn't bring a sort of new population into the championships, because basically it's just when you maybe haven't built your F4C model as lightly as you wanted to, it ends up overweight and bang, it's then an F4G. Does that sound familiar, Dad? From a few years back. Right, next one, Roger. So yeah, that's all the static scoring. And again, next one. I'm just quickly going through these. I mean, you can reference the FAI rulebook at a later date, but it's pretty irrelevant. And next one. This is then looking at the flight schedule. All of the RC flights, all of the RC classes, sorry, follow the same flight schedule. So you've takeoff and landing, your 2 compulsories, descending circle and figure of 8, nearly forgot it there. Then your 6 optional manoeuvres, and then the realism sections. Next one, Roger. And again. And again. Okay, so has F4G been successful? It was first introduced in around, I'm going to say it was 2005, 2006. And it was offered as, it's always been a provisional class, so it has been offered as an open international contest at various world or European championships. The most successful one was in Włocławek in 2008, where there is that Sopwith camel that ended up above the 15 kilos down in the bottom. The only time Dad ever competed with that overseas, and me looking rather pensive in the back with Dave Knott. Since then, there have been various attempts to host an F4G class, but the entry levels have been really limited. And as Paul already said, in Marmande in 2014, that was the last time that it was actually held, when there were only 4 entries, and all 4 of them came from France. In terms of domestically, there's not too many countries actually fly it. Poland and Czech Republic seem to be the main protagonists in it. However, as I'm saying here, there are a lot of 20 kg models out there, which could end up being at a World Championships. And that's coming into play with the Pro-Am rules at Top Gun and the derivative that they fly in Brazil. Okay, next, Roger. So flying only is something which most nations throughout the world have a flying only class. But what I've seen in sort of like, as I've come on board as the coach and team manager for the UK, where I found it quite disappointing was there wasn't really any encouragement there for people to build or even to pimp up their ARFs. So sometimes you would go along to a Sunday event in the UK and there would be 7 Black Horse Chipmunks. That seems to be the steed of choice in the UK. All of them just straight out the box, throw the super glue in the box, give it a shake, out it comes. So what I wanted to do was to try and encourage people to move those sort of few steps forward towards actually building an aircraft and maybe going F4H and then ultimately F4C. So the main advantage to flying only is there's literally no barriers to entry. You can enter with a model that you've bought. So no issue there at all. So very quickly you can start competing. And then, as I've already alluded to there, the main disadvantage is there's no incentive to encourage building or even rework an ARF. So that is where this proposal comes from. So on to the next one, Roger. So I would, as F4G really hasn't been successful, rather than add an additional class in the FAI rules, and with F4G really just being a heavier version of F4C, I'm proposing, or I'm suggesting, that we rework the F4G rules and replace it with this class. So keep it the same, weight limit, 20 kilos. The flight to static ratio, I would say a ratio of 4:1 in favour of flight. So it's not quite flying only because there is the little bit of static there, but certainly coming along with a Pete McDermott model or whatever, then you're not going to have a huge advantage with that. Someone who is a good flyer with a sort of like benign and well-flying model is likely to do well. So flight schedule, again, still use the same one, same as F4C and F4H. And next slide, Roger. And that again is just like detailing the flight schedule. Next one. So these are the static criteria. Now I've got this just really as a starting point. I'm open to whatever suggestions, and I know there's going to be one coming from New Zealand because we spoke about it this morning. But broadly, there's 5 sections. The proposal would be, while you're doing the static judging, that all aircraft would be done at the same time. So every model gets put in a set area. In terms of documentation, everyone provides an A3 board. It's up to them what they put on that A3 board in terms of like numbers of photos, etc. And the board would just be put in front of the aircraft, and then the 2 static judges would just have a wander around and assess them in a general and non-detailed manner. So the 5 sections you're looking at is build origin, at the moment documentation quality, general proportions, colour and markings, and finish and realism. So the total K factor there, just with the way I've worked it, was to make it up to 25 versus the flight K factor or coefficient of 100. So there's your 4 to 1. Okay, next one, Roger. So the build origin, just a few different things there. So on the left-hand side, you've got one there which is scratch built. That's the RWD6 that Philip Kent has drawn up the plans for me. Or there in the top centre, you have a Mick Reeves kit. On the right-hand side, that's Pete Fullard's new Westland Wyvern. I think is it a Black Horse or Seagull? I can't remember what it is, but he's basically completely reworked it. And then in the centre, you've got the Jet Masters, where most of the aircraft were built by a company in Germany that were there. So on this, I would propose using, there we go, larger Black Horse Wyvern. Thanks, Ben. You would gain more marks depending on how much effort that you had put in here. So in a similar way to the F4H marks, if you had scratch built or built from a plan, then you'll get the 10 out of 10. Whereas if you've bought the aircraft, you'll score 0 out of 10. But all of them are eligible to enter. Okay, next one, Roger. So documentation quality. This was one where I sort of decided to put this in based on experiences that I had when judging in Brazil. So the Pro-Am class that they have in Brazil is a development of the Pro-Am class that Frank Tiano flies at Top Gun. Pro-Am basically is flying only, but you get a static mark of, or a static award of 25 points. And basically all you need to do for that is come along and show a photo, anything, to basically tick the box to say that your subject existed. In Brazil, what they had done was they had suggested that you have 4 photos, and those aircraft or those entrants who had submitted 4 photos would score higher than those with 1 or 2. However, it didn't talk about the quality of the photos. So, I mean, there was one that I looked at, there was a sort of like fuzzy picture of the full size, then 2 very close-up pictures of undercarriage and one of the cockpit. and that aircraft ended up scoring higher than someone who had 2 very good photos. So this was why I had thought and having this documentation quality thing. So you could just put forward a 3 view if that's all you wanted. You could put forward just like an artist's impression, like you sometimes get in the plastic kits, or on the right hand side, a few photos and a 3 view. And I think you can probably see from this that I will be having a flying only model of a de Havilland Moth Minor. Next slide. General proportions. Here, again, not like F4C or not like F4H. You're not looking like sitting down with the drawings and really analysing the aircraft. You're just looking at it and saying, does it broadly look like the full size did? So there on the left, you've got a Seagull Westland Lysander, and then on the right hand side, Dusan Barina from Czech Republic's incredible Lysander. So here, the aircraft on the right would obviously score higher than the one on the left. But you're not being super critical like you are with in F4C. It's just, does it generally look right? If the curvature of the wingtip isn't quite there as it should be, then it doesn't really matter. But in the likes of this, where the nose has been elongated, then that would suffer a downgrade. Okay, next one, Roger. Colour and markings. Again, is it broadly correct? If it's a couple of shades out, doesn't really matter. But there, the aircraft on the left there, and then the colour profile on the right, that is actually the same registration. So you can see that it's not really there with that one. So that would obviously suffer a little bit of a downgrade. Next one, Roger. And then you've got the finish and realism. So is the correct type of covering material being used? Does it have some sort of depth of finish, or is it like a really plain finish? And there we've got a selection. You've got Brian Taylor's Bristol Bulldog, Fabian Busson's Focke-Wulf 190 at the top. And then there won't be too many people that will recognise that Spitfire down in the bottom, but that was an infamous guy that used to come along and compete in Scotland for a number of years, who used to literally fly the aircraft into the ground, but then repair them, and they still flew exceptionally well. But obviously that doesn't look overly realistic. Okay, that's it. Next slide. So I'm just looking for input now, suggestions, amendments. All I'll say is, like, think objectively. Don't think about the class and sort of say, oh, I'm not interested in that class, that's no good. That's not what we're looking at. We're trying to think of capturing a different population to come along to the championships. So, Mr. Avenel, I know you have a question, so we'll go straight, or a comment, we'll go straight in on you, and documentation quality.
Yeah, Graham and I spoke about this briefly yesterday, and I just gave him my personal experience of when I first went to the World Champs in 2000 in Switzerland, and then subsequently about 6 years later, I think it was, in Sweden. And one of the things that we found, because we were newbies at the thing, we arrived in Switzerland with what we felt was documentation that fitted the bill, and we were quite, not disturbed, but you know, it was quite obvious that our documentation fell really short. And we spent a lot of time, and we took photos of Peter McDermott's documentation and everything, and reworked it when we came back a couple of years later. And one of the things that occurs to me with this documentation that is looking at, we're talking about discussing here, is the need to simplify it. And in order to simplify it, I firmly believe that there should be a standard template to be used so that everybody goes to a competition with a much better expectation of what documentation they have to provide. So if they have an A3 or an A2 sheet, it's got provision for 4 photos, it's got provision for a 3 view, it's got provision for surface texture and surface finish. So essentially the judge's job is simplified all the way through by looking at absolutely common documentation all the way through, because you aren't going to subject it to a huge amount of scrutiny, but it's nice for them to have that consistency to see that they can compare the other models too as well. It just, to me, I think one of the biggest things that really puts a lot of people off competing is that lack of knowledge about the documentation that's required. You shouldn't really be asking them to interpret a minefield of FAI rules to figure out what it is they have to bring in front of the judges. And this way it would simplify that. You'd know what you have to bring. It's written, it's in there for you, and you turn up and your documentation is probably at the same consistency as everybody else. So that was my 2 cents worth for Graham yesterday before he went to sleep at about 2 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah, that was my thoughts anyway.
Yep. Chris?
No, I think the idea is quite good. First of all, it's a matter of weight. The 25 kilos is a FAI limit. Then again, that limit has not been moved for many years. So what we also can consider, because of, let's say, large warbirds and large jets, is actually to go outside the F4 and go into the general rules and try to get maybe 30 kilos. Could be an idea that can be thought of and tested, and because there is, I don't remember when, but there is several years since that limit was put on the general rules. That's one of the things. The next thing is that when we're going to change something like the F4G class, and you probably had some experience during your time as the chairman, that when you sit in the bureau meeting, you actually had to change it to something that is not similar to the rest of the classes. So to make it even more, let's say, easy in the documentation thing, we'll maybe separate it a little more from F4H.
Yeah.
Because now it's just actually right now what separates F4G and F4C is just the weight limit actually, and that's why it's not been that popular inside the bureau either, because the rules are quite similar for different classes. So last year they actually told us to take all provisional classes out of the sporting code and put into a, let's say, a sleeping sporting code. That's why I discussed also when we talked about free flight scale rules, and also the F4B, because they are actually flown throughout the world. But if we're going to change the F4G to something else, I think it must be, it's fine to use the same flight routines, because the flight routines is not the problem with people. It's the documentation that's the problem. So but it should be quite more separated from, let's see, F4Z has a rather complicated way of documentation. Then you have F4H, who is a little bit more simpler. But then if you're going to do F4G, I think it must be even more simple. But the idea that you have, and the idea Gwen said, that we have a template for how to do it. It's like 2 picture, 1 tree, but that's it. I mean,
Yep.
Something very, very simple should be, in my mind, the best effort, maybe.
Yep.
Um,
Chris Allen. You need to unmute Chris. Chris, you need to unmute.
He's occupied. He's occupied in the island still. There we go.
Hey, there we go.
Right. Yeah, we talked about this, I know, Graham, on odd occasions over the last probably 2 years, and I always felt that the FAI weren't going to be receptive to the idea we have in the UK of a flying only class with no static at all. So as you quite rightly identified, what we need to do is to try and simplify the static. And I totally agree with Gwyn when he says we want to make the concept of the static documentation requirements very simple and easy to understand, and to use a template, and the template should be part of the rules. And I thoroughly agree with that. A couple of detail issues though that I'm a little bit concerned about. One is, I think the important thing about a lot of static judging is the judging distance. Now you haven't mentioned it, and you've come up with the idea where you put all the models in a place, and the judges walk round and evaluate each one against the prescribed criteria. No problem with that, but inevitably you're going to get people saying, oh, well, they looked at mine much closer than they looked at his. So we need to be specific about judging distance. And I want people to think about that. I don't have a distance in mind, but I would say it should be something greater than what we currently use for F4H, which is 5 meters. The next one is when you talk about general proportions, and okay, you use the example of a Lysander. I would suggest that not everybody is totally familiar with the outline of a Lysander, but the concept is that with current judging requirements on scale models, the static judge cannot use prior knowledge. The flight judge has to use prior knowledge because he needs to know how the airplane performs in order to judge its flight performance. Static judging, you use the documentation. And if in the case of our own UK domestic flying only class, there's no static judging rule, so it doesn't apply. But once you introduce any form of static judging, you have to think about what the requirements of the judge is, because as I've said, currently static judges cannot use prior knowledge of the aeroplane. So
I'm not suggesting that they use prior knowledge of the aeroplane whatsoever. The aircraft will be judged with the documentation provided. Okay. So I just threw up 2 Lysanders there to show the differential and say something where the nose has been elongated, etc., will suffer a downgrade, but a slight variation in curve won't. That's where it is, but I'm not suggesting that prior knowledge is used.
You've answered my question, then it's not a problem.
Yeah.
The only other issue is I think we should explore Gwyn's idea of using a template. And as he says,
yep, definitely.
As he says, and I like the idea of it all being on one A3 board, because that's a first definition of what you expect to see. And the A3 board will be in the hands of the judges, I would imagine, because if you're going to set a judging distance of anything more than about a meter, most people won't be able to see it. I think that's something which we can look at in more detail. But I like the idea of an A3 board, and I think from a starting point, a basic definition of what's on that board could easily be A3 view drawing and supporting photographs. And I would like to keep it very simple and keep it in no more detailed terms than that. In other words, A3 view drawing and supporting photographs. And if you're not going to ask the competitor to pick up the model and move it around so that you can look at the underneath of it, and you can look at particular aspects of it. In other words, you're simply judging it on how it appears to you. There it is on the ground, X distance away from you, and you have your A3 board. I like that idea. That's very simple. So yeah, I'm all for that. And the other issues, well, I think speak for themselves. The build origin, the documentation quality, yes, because unless the documentation is clear, then it's obviously of poor quality. Color and marking speak for themselves. Yeah, okay.
Cool.
I've had my say.
And then just saw the coming up a question from David Oakley.
Yeah.
What I tend to hear, because I call around to a lot of people around the world talking about scale, and we always talking about how to get new people into competitions. I mean, the problem and that's the problem actually for the subcommittee also, is that when you're making rules, it should work. It must work in the World Championship. But the problem is that the sporting goal should also work on a national level. And the more complicated we make it, the more complicated people around the world think it is. But they usually don't complain about the flying. The flying, most people say is quite straightforward to understand. It's more difficult to come up to the, let's say, the correct level in documentation. F4H, it's not a problem. F4C is more difficult, of course. But the thing is here, we have seen it also with F4H. When people start flying F4H, some of them at the later stage move to go to F4C. So thereby, if we can manage to get, let's say, a provisional class that it's even more simpler than the F4H, we maybe attract even more people to start flying scale competitions. And that must be the goal of this class, actually, to get more people to enter and get more interest in flying scale competitions, and therefore keep the static as simple as possible, because static is the problem usually. You could use an flying only class also. There is nobody in this FAI system, when I talk system, I mean the bureau, that is against that thing. But that's all the way up to the subcommittee, because that's how it works. If the subcommittee agrees in having a flying only class, it's not a problem to get it through the bureau and the plenary. It's if we want a flying only class, let's say in the international system, I think, in my mind, I think it's better to have a simple scale class that is easy to understand and easy to enter for the first time, and use it like you use flying only in UK right now. Because the problem with flying only is that usually, I not say every time, but usually most of the guys who enters flying only competition, they stay in F4 in flying only for a long time. I have a couple of guys I know that have moved up to F4H, but I think it will be wise to have a little amount of static included, because you have to learn that if you're gonna move on to F4H and maybe later to F4C. The little knowledge of how to present a quite easy documentation is good. And that's why I'm not against flying only, but I don't think it will work as a, let's say, a learning class, because then you don't have the documentation, and then again they never learn how to use it, and never learn how to present it, and then again there is a long step to go into a competition with a documentation demand, if that's a way to explain it in a bad Norwegian English.
Ben?
Yeah, no, I really like the idea. I probably can say I'm the youngest person here by the looks.
Yeah, definitely.
not to cause offence, I'm just checking before I say anything. No, I like the idea. I mean, I competed at the Nationals for the first time last year. Because I couldn't qualify because of certain things, car breaking down and a whole load of stuff, I actually had to do the standoff at the Nationals, and that meant I had to get documentation within a week, which was not terrible. It's doable. So, I mean, with the idea that we're coming up with at the minute of just very basic, minimal documentation, I don't think that's much of a strain to go by. I mean, at all, really. I mean, I didn't find the standoff one that bad, to be honest. Yes, I had to change the markings of a Spitfire at very short notice, but it was doable. Obviously, that's a rule within standoff. But I mean, in terms of the documentation, I'm not seeing an issue. The only thing that concerns me with this entry class is the one that goes up to 20 kilos, because a model that maybe, I don't know, let's say they buy a generic ARTF off the shelf, Chipmunk, as it was always popular in the UK, they weigh probably just under 7, maybe a little bit heavy if you buy the bigger ones. Whereas if you're flying against some chap with a 15 kilo odd model in a heavy wind, let's say, and the flying is weighted more at 4-1, that's going to make a bigger difference. I know I can only say that from experience of Barkston, which is notoriously windy at the Nationals, wasn't too bad last year, but there were certain aspects where my foamy Spitfire was being blown about and the chaps with wooden ones were having no problems. But I can just see that being replicated in terms of the jump now between something that maybe an average is 7 kilos up to the bigger chaps who may be 15 kilos, 16 kilos.
You are into something, because the thing is, the F4G class was actually made to maybe attract the guys who usually fly at Top Guns or at jet meetings. And then again, we have the problem now. If we're gonna make a new class, should it be a beginner's class, or should it be a class for the guys who actually buys the big stuff? That's a problem.
I think there's two ways. I mean, for me, going after the lot at Top Gun seems a slightly wrong direction, because you're not going for the grassroots sort of people who you may get interested in. You got the people that are in it now and they're like, oh, I want to fly all my stuff here now and then. But you're not looking so much to the people that may appear in, I don't know, 5 years' time or so, that are going to start off like me. I had smaller stuff. I then got the bigger stuff. I bought an ARTF, did a competition at the Nationals, and now I've forked out to get a bench and build stuff. I've not got the money to fly a couple of grand turbine or anything like that. So I think it's a limiting market if you're looking in that way. Whereas if you're starting a beginner class, like flying only here is in the UK, I know when I've gone on Sundays, I'm seeing sort of different people, the every fortnight whenever it's held. Otherwise, I think if you go for the model of Top Gun, you're going to kind of see the same people every time, and you'll be back where you started maybe about, in 3-4 years.
Not quite, Ben. It's the Pro-Am class at Top Gun that we're looking at, not like expert masters, etc. And Pro-Am is basically flying only.
Oh, okay. It's their version, is it? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not the, I can see he's on the call. It's not the Dave Wiggleys with his Wyvern and his Bullfighter that we're going for. It's the people who are coming along and competing at their first Top Gun.
Okay.
So Gwen can't compete. No, I think, but it's an interesting thing to hear, because when you're making rules, who will go in the sporting code, it's like an international rule book, and what we must consider is that sometimes, and hopefully we can use that class in a world championship, of course in the start as a provisional class, but then it's a strange thing, because when you come to that level that it's called a world championship, then everything then you need to have good rules, because there will always be somebody who says, you know, so the rules must be strict. And I think nationally, when you're flying, let's say this class back home in your country, I don't think you have that problem. But if you come to a world championships, I think most of the competitors with a 20 kilo weight limit will be very close to the quote 20K when it comes to a world championship. But I think to use this scale class nationally will be maybe not that big problem. It's a difficult topic.
A question from Graham Green, just about proving the colour of the model if you've only got a black and white picture, but then you're only allowed a 3-view and say 4 pictures. Well, in that case, you would be allowed a written description, the same as it is in all the other classes as well. Martin Kinder has raised the topic again about the weight. Perhaps it's something, I mean, at Jet Masters, Bill Grimsley's on here tonight as well, but at Jet Masters, there was a lower weight limit class introduced, wasn't there? It was basically exactly the same criteria, but is it 13.5 and 20 kilos as the two?
Yeah, 13.5 kilo.
So, I mean, this could be split. You could actually say, you could have it that up to 10 kilos and then sort of open.
The reason that they chose the 13.5 kilo was twofold. One was the cost of a 20 kilo jet model, which could be up to 16,000 £. And then there was the transportation of it. It was highly expensive, especially when we went to China. The other thing was that if they went to the 13.5 kilo because it was cheaper, and it was cheaper to buy, cheaper to build, and it was also cheaper to transport. The funny thing is, it never really took off. And I think one of the reasons is it doesn't matter what size the model is, the best model and the best pilot always wins. It doesn't matter what class it is. And I think that's one of the sticking points for quite a few of the pilots. I mean, if you go to some of these competitions, especially the Jet Masters at the moment, it's the same guys that won, the same teams that won the whole time.
Yeah.
A difficult regulation.
Doug, do you wish to ask a question? Apologies, you're actually in the part of my screen that is damaged, so forgive me, I couldn't see you up in that corner. No.
Can I make a point, Graham?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it, Steve.
It's about this 20 kilo business. I don't know what the situation would be in other parts of the world, but I know in the UK, some of the clubs have a strict weight limit. And so some of the sites we might fly at, might not accommodate 20 kilo models.
Yeah.
We already have this problem with gas turbines, because I had somebody who wanted to fly at one of the competitions a couple of years ago with a gas turbine, and the club we were flying at, the club site we were using, would not allow gas turbines at that time of year because of risk of crop fires. And as most of our competitions fall across the period when there's a risk of crop fires, we automatically discount gas turbines from some of our events. And we might have the same problem with 20 kilo models at some of the sites we use. The other issue goes back to what Ben was saying earlier. When I've spoken to clubs about scale flying, one of the most common excuses I hear for not having a go, and it maybe is an excuse, is that people say, well, the models are too big. You know, we haven't got big cars. We can't afford to build great big models. And so we wouldn't be competitive. And I've tried to sort of get the point across that Al won the Nationals, flying only a couple of years ago with a Venom of about 60-inch span. And that Colin, I can't remember his name, Colin won it twice with a 60-inch Tiger Moth a few years back. So size doesn't matter as much, I think, as Ben said it does in the flying, but I think it matters in people's perception. And if they're going to see people turning up with, 20 kilo monsters, then it is going to put newcomers off, I think, anyway.
So it could be an idea just to put, like, let's say a weight limit on 7.5 kilos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got,
That would be good.
I mean, totally open.
Open forum for discussion. So, I mean, if this is just something we throw out, but I mean, if we're gonna attract new people, because that's the goal of the whole thing, then maybe, like Andy also said last year, is maybe have a class for smaller models, so 7.5 kilos or 5 kilos, I don't know, but somewhere around that can maybe attract more novice pilots to enter scale.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that the only reason I had the 20 was adapting the class. I have no strong thoughts. Most of my aircraft are, the heaviest one's probably going to be 7.5, 8 kilos. So,
and another thing is that from a SIAM point of view, then it's more easy to explain to the Bureau that we actually are making a new class, because it's totally a different stuff than the rest. We also have the weight discussions in F4C and F4H, but due to the fact, the same as they have in the jets, they are getting too big. And I mean, you can build quite big models in 15 kilos nowadays. Just look at Mr. Krabs' 3-engine thing. It's a huge model. So, and we're going to transport them around the world, and that's an expensive thing. So maybe a class with, let's say, 7.5 kilo or 5 kilo, I don't know, will be a nice entry class for people to join.
I think one of the problems with that, though, is that there's a lot of people are flying foam models, and the foam models are getting bigger and bigger, and they are very light. So that's sort of discouraging the models to build, as opposed to just assemble a plastic one.
Yeah. The only thing is a big light model, it's not certain that it's the best flying scale model in the sky. So, yeah. But I mean, there will always be problems with rules. I mean, it's just to try to find a solution that we think will work. You see that in jets also. They started with a small rule book. Now it's getting thicker and thicker every year. And that's, it always occurs problems, especially when you're doing competitions. And it's to try to get it as simply as possible without, and it must be clear enough so people understand it, but still it have to cope with all the problems that can come up during a competition. And like you said, you can build a big model in a lightweight, yeah, but it can be reduced to wingspan, but I don't benefit. I don't think that's a good idea, but could be. I don't know.
Okay, just going down through the questions that are on the chat window. So next person in line, Mr. Sefton. Then we're going to David Law. Then I think Doug's gone offline. So then we've got Augustine, then Danny, and then I see George wants one as well. So first of all, Andy.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Ben in that I don't think if the aim is to get new people to come into scale, having a 20 kg limit, I don't think will work, because the cost of a 20 kg model, the wherewithal that goes with operating it and transporting it, all needs a lot of money being thrown at it. So I don't think people are going to come into scale competition with a big model. A few years ago, on that basis, and we do need to bring new people in, I introduced light scale. It was a suggestion by Martin Kinder, who I think is with us this evening. So I put it to the Scale Tech Committee, and we brought it in as similar rules to all our other scale competitions, except the maximum weight was 5 kgs, with a view to get club flyers, all club scale flyers have got a 5 kg model. And it was with a view to get those involved in competition. In some respects, it hasn't worked, because we've only had 1 or 2 people turning up to the competition. But looking at it from a slightly different point of view, at our last national championships, I think we got 3 or was it 4 new entries from people who'd never flown before, who came in because of the light scale competition, and Ben was one of them. So although it's not worked in our day-to-day competition, having a lighter scale competition or lighter limit for a scale competition has in fact brought new people into our national championships. So food for thought, really.
Okay, next, David Law. Is your audio working?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay. We've tried several entry-level competitions in Australia for the purpose of bringing people in to move through the classes with the ultimate goal of ending up in F4C. And every new class we've introduced as an entry-level, in some respect it's failed, because the people who enter that class always stay in that class. So I think you probably need to establish if you want to just introduce a new class, or are you introducing a so-called entry level that people are going to move through, because the risk is there that they won't move through that class, they'll just stay in it. And what do you do to encourage people to move on through that class? I can understand at a World Championships if that class was to attract more numbers, but if the thought behind it is that you may get people from that class moving on to do other things, I'm not sure that that would be the case.
No, they could be made a system for that, but I know what you're talking about. But I see in F4G they have a system on national levels that you can't just stay in the entry level for 2 seasons or 3 seasons or something. That's one idea of it that could be talked about. Next thing I saw also on the chat from Hannu from Finland said that why need a new class? Why don't try to where it does disappear now? Do we need more promotion or salesmen instead? And that's also, I thought, more positive talk about scale can be a good thing. But there is one more issue, and that's the economics in a scale competition, especially a world championship. If you have a third class in some way, that will maybe attract 35 or 40 more people, and then the economics is better, and that will benefit for everybody, because I think to go to a world championship, because now I'm talking world championships, not on national level, but if you're going to a world championship, it's quite expensive. And some of us know and the entrance fee is quite high. And if we can get 35 more competitors in another class, then the entry fee must go down, because you don't actually need extra judges or coming to the championships, because they are already there. The problem can be how to deal with 3 classes in one airfield. That's a different story. So it's a lot of thinking back and forth, but I think it's an idea to find out if we need more classes, and should it be just for a national thing? Should it be an international thing? Should it even be in the sporting code? I don't know. I think F4H is quite simple to enter with the current rules. I mean, you can buy yourself an aircraft and still compete if you declare it that way, of course. But I can see maybe the need for a class for, let's say, that the really novice guys, but I see it probably more on a national level than a world championship level.
Yeah.
Right. Adrian Hayward, you'd made a comment. You're just saying that in some ways a beginner's class needs to be just that. Some wannabe flyers that have tried to get interested, want to have a go, but feel that they cannot compete against national champions. Okay, valid point. Augustine from Spain has said that when the CIAM subcommittee decided on F4G, the price factor and the transport factor were especially discussed. Danny, do you want to mention your comment?
I'm just thinking, why not turn it on its head? We look at weight as a divider for the classes. Why not look at scale, say 1/5 or 1/6 or something like that? The problem with going to a larger scale model is it cries out for more detail, and that usually takes more time. So if you want to bring somebody in with something that may still be quite scale, but not a 4-year epic, if you make the model more the traditional Brian Taylor type size, it opens up a whole range of models that are fairly cheap to build, fairly cheap to kit out, and fairly easy to transport around. If you do it by weight, a lot of the new ARTFs are incredibly light, and you can end up with still quite a large model, as other people have said, that's under the weight. I'm just throwing ideas out there, really, but I'm just wondering whether it's worth looking at the scale as a class limiter rather than the weight.
The difficulty with the scale is because you've got things like a Tipsy Nipper versus a B-52.
Yeah, exactly.
If you go on a scale, then the sizes are huge, so that's why weight tended to be the one that was used.
Yeah. No, I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
You may be restricted to single engine rather than multi.
Yeah.
To try and mitigate that a little bit. But,
and George.
I had some things written down. The main question was, or has already been discussed when Ben mentioned it, the size. And this is directly related to what also Chris pointed out. What is the main purpose of this class? Exactly as Chris put it.
Yeah.
A world championship class or a class to attract new people? You have to define that first. The size to me seems excessive at 20 kilograms. I see a similarity to a discussion we had a few weeks ago about kit scale. If you want to attract new athletes, it's the analog to kit scale in the smaller pre-flight models. So even the factor of flying is, let's say, similar to encourage less skilled or less experienced builders. The next 2 points I will make are more specific, which might seem a bit, let's say, not interesting at the moment, because we are discussing the main overall philosophy of this class. And they have to do with, and they are more specific, they have to do with judging, let's say. Based on your presentation, personally, considering what also Chris said, I would have no problem with judging a model even from way, way close. The idea of having them on a table or on the floor and having the possibility to pick the documentation immediately with all the models together without wasting time, somehow I find it appealing, because you save a lot of time. You have the possibility to view the model from any angle you want, because you cannot be sure which kind of photographs or angles of the photographs will need to be checked or viewed. And I don't think we would want the competitor to be there as well, like with the F4C, F4H classes. So since the judging, the static judging is so limited in terms of vital points for the process of the judging, I have no problem with being as close as 0.5 meter, as 1 meter, or whatever you need in order to make a general assessment of the model. And the last point is, if it makes any sense at all, of course, for the rather national level, not for the international level, what happens if you have no scale documentation at all? Can you still fly and get 0 for static and still be considered as a legitimate entry? That's all I have.
I mean, there was a case of that back in 2000 in Interlaken. The Kuwaiti team turned up and they had 2 aircraft, one of which was an F4G or a pattern model, and the other one was in the shape of the Kuwaiti flag. So yes, they got involved in some way, but yeah, obviously didn't get a static mark. That's a little bit different to what you were saying though, George, but yeah. Ben has commented just about 10 kilos. I mean, everyone seems to be going towards like around a 7.5, 10 kilos now for this class. Great, no issue whatsoever with that. That was the whole purpose of tonight, just to throw something in there and then get the input from all over the world so that we get something that everyone buys into. Richard just asking about the proposal for a team class, and that's already there, Richard. It's F4K? J? F4J. So yeah, the team class is already there. Again, that was flown in Marmande. I think there were only 2 entrants, and that's the only time that it's happened. Chris, does yours? I think George has sort of covered most of what you've mentioned in your.
Yes, he has. But I mean, I just wanted to make the point really that, as Andy has already said, we have started this light scale idea in the UK, which has had a slowish start. I would imagine would be the best way of describing it. But internationally, if we're talking about trying to attract more people to turn up at a World Championship, then you're looking to get, hopefully, the best models from each of the competing countries. Now, previously when we ran F4G, as you said, in Václavic was the last successful time we did it. It was an open class, effectively.
Yeah.
And now, if you run an open class in parallel with a World Championship class, you're not defining the number of people in a team.
No.
Now, this argument about numbers in the team was kicked to death when F4H first mooted some years ago. And the argument was put, well, if you've got a world champion, originally, before we had F4H, there was only effectively one class, and that was F4C. And the winner was the world champion. Now, if you're going to start introducing more classes and have world championship winners in separate classes, like some of the other disciplines have done, I don't have a problem with that in itself, but you've got to come up with a definition of a class which is going to be popular enough to ensure you get sufficient entries. And so you could say, well, yes, if a light scale class, for example, proves to be attractive domestically in the scale competing nations, then that's what you want to go for. If a flying only class does the same, then that's what you want to go for. So really it's a case of saying, well, what works domestically should give you an indication as to what might work internationally. That's assuming we all think more or less alike, and we all think that it will work. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I've scratched my head over this issue for years, and I don't really know. I'm grateful for this opportunity to put my points, and I hope that, Graham, with your analytical mind, you can come up with a shall we say, a balanced view of all the discussion tonight, and I wish you luck. But I still struggle with the idea of trying to produce a class or come up with the basics for a class to attract more people to fly scale models in competition, or to come up with a class that would attract more international competitors to go to a world champs. George has said much the same thing. And I rest my case. I don't know what the answer is. You can only really try it. I mean, as I think Richard just said, he picked up the question of F4J. F4J never really took off. And yet, I can remember years ago at the plenary, there was a lot of debate. Well, not the plenary, but the technical meeting before it. There was a lot of people saying, well, we need a team class. And when we produced a team class, nothing happened. Yeah. So we need to be a bit careful about this, I think.
Again, Simon V is sort of like putting another tick in the box against 10 kilos.
Yep.
I can see that Hanno is writing that the World Jet Masters,
oh, yeah,
it seems to be very famous. What they do differently compared to FAI scale. I talked a little bit with Mr. Sen about that. Thing is, if you get people, and that's the strange thing, if you most of the models flying the Jetmaster could easily fly in an F4H class. In FAI, it would not be any problem, especially with the light models, and some of them do. But I think also there is a slightly different, because when you are interested in jets, most of the guys who's flying jets is particularly into jets. So when they have a competition with just jets, they will go that way instead of going for an F4H competition. But in the start, and the other guy here can probably say if I'm right or wrong, but in the start, they started up the Jet Masters as an easygoing, easy to compete competition with low shoulders, compared to the FAI World Championships, who is a whole lot of rules and a whole lot of stuff. But then again, after some years, you can also see in the Jet Masters that it's getting more and more complicated because of rules. But I think it's a way of interest. The Jet Masters is very successfully because it attracts the jet guys. It's every second year, isn't it? And they have their special interest for the jet. I don't know, last championships in Switzerland, I think interest we had for years.
Yeah.
In our FAI championship, and I think that's because they like to compete in an environment with people who are doing the same stuff, and they got quite popular. The Jet Masters is a popular competition for the jet guys. Why they don't compete in F4 in an F4 competition, I really don't know, because many of those could easily be at a high level in F4H, especially F4H. And in F4C we have a couple of jets in the top, so I really don't know. I think many people around the world look at the sporting code and think it's very complicated, so they turn around and do some things. And I don't think, and this can be maybe to put fire on the thing, but I don't think we who have been in the scale community has been, I think we have talked the sport a little up. I think we talk about it in a very, so people can hear that it's very complicated. I think we should be trying to get to simplify it a little bit when we talk about scale, because the guys who is coming into scale, it's like one of them say they're writing that they don't want to compete against champions, and like you see in Norway there are not so many champions, but I can see the problem in UK when you're going to Nats for the first time, and the first one you meet is Pete McDermott and Mick Reeves. And that can scare people off, I think. So the way of making a sort of entrance class, and that the guys who actually doing scale talks about it, so it seems more easy to come into scale and learn it. Because to build scale models is a learning process, and if you start, it takes you 10 to 15 years to get into an F4C level, I think. But also many of us, when we talk about scale, talk about rules, and that's why I think that is a difference between the jets and us. The jet guys, they go to the World Jet Master, they fly. Sometimes there is something problem there also, but I think they have a little more laid back way of promoting their competition. Did it sound bad in my Norwegian English?
No, not at all.
Or did you understand?
I understood, although I'm used to speaking with you, so. Andy, do you want to make your?
Yeah, it was just a thought.
General.
When I was lobbying the BMFA to introduce pistachio, in 1990. One of the free flight chaps, John O'Donnell, got in touch with me, and what I did was sent out a questionnaire to all the people that flew indoors, and he said, if you want to make up a competition to introduce new people, you need to ask the people who don't do it, not the people who do. And I think we're making the same mistake here, in that we're asking around ourselves to find a new class, and we've decided that 10 kgs is a good figure. And it might be for all of us, but if we're trying to introduce new people, we need to find out what the new people want. So we need to ask the people that don't do it and find out what would bring them into this part of the hobby, or the sport, whatever you like to call it. There you go.
Yeah.
Martin.
I don't know how we're going to do that, but I think that's what we need to do.
Martin Kinder, do you want to say your comment? Basically, it's about promoting ourselves. So although we maybe within our own disciplines, we are good at promoting our own aspect of the hobby, but we're not good at public relations across the other disciplines, because perhaps someone that flies pattern might want to fly scale if they find out about this new class. Matthew, I'm not sure what your surname is, but Matthew, do you want to make your point?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, it was just a thought. It just came to me. If you want to try and attract people, I think sometimes the thought of coming up from something from scratch is quite daunting. And maybe if you had just like a selection of set models, set scale, you know, either a plan built or an ARTF, just pick something that's generally popular, you know, probably fixed undercarriage, something like that, not too hard to maintain, so that everyone's effectively competing on a similar playing, you know, on a level playing field. So you could have, I don't know, say you did have something with a like a tiger moth or something like that, but a set scale, and the documentation is almost provided. So this is your plans, this is your photos, make it look like this, so people can turning up and just effectively competing with the same plane. You know, maybe have half a dozen to pick from, and then you could have a lot of support from the experts with the documentation, even build advice, finishing advice, and then it's up to the individual how far they go with the building.
I think that will probably work nationally, but I don't think it will work internationally.
Well, I think it goes back to some of the other questions. It depends what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
If you're trying to attract beginners and newbies to it, you've got to start them somewhere. And if you set the bar too high, you're just not going to get people, or you're going to get a limited number of people.
The other thing you would need to watch, that by only having a set list, it may not appeal to everyone. Like there might not be an aircraft on that list that someone wants to do.
Oh no, so that's right. But then they could go into one of the other classes. But you could have them competing in the same class. You don't have to have a different flying class. You could just say, if you want an extra bit of help, you know, pick one of these. There's all this stuff in the background to help you. I don't know, people could do build videos, or you know, you could do articles on it. And then it was just a thought.
Good point.
Just have to answer Christopher Allen's question, because that was not what I meant, but that's a different story.
I just threw a hand grenade in there, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. That's also a problem, because when we worked with this in the subcommittee, and you know it's also a problem if we get too many classes, because then all the classes will be small. If you see, when we're talking internationally, so there is a.
I was coming from the point where if you want to attract more people to a world champs, the only way you can do it is to increase the size of the teams. And that means that there will be more people coming from the competing nations. And just like a lot of other sporting disciplines, you subdivide the class. You say, okay, there's the world champ. He's the number one out of the whole lot. And then you give additional prizes for, say, the best jet, the best biplane, the best warbird, etc. That was what I was trying to say.
Yeah, good. Ben and Adrian both had questions. It's the last one, Graham.
Yeah, I'm sort of going down through the chat window. So Adrian was saying about a league system. I mean, what we used to have was when it was clubmen, and basically if you had won in F4C, you weren't allowed to enter in clubmen. So I mean, rather than have a league system or anything else, you could actually say, if this is going to be an intro class, then basically those that have experience in the others aren't allowed. So
Agree with that.
We've got something like that in F4H now.
Yeah, we do.
Ben's busting to ask a question. His arm must be aching.
Yeah, go for it, Ben. I'm trying to. You do that while I go down through all these other ones.
Right. Okay. I feel we're going round in circles of what we're trying to define.
We are.
I'll put it very straight. I think it should be certainly for the World Championships. When we're talking about beginners, I don't think we're talking about total freshers that have come from nothing. I think you've kind of got to be maybe in the position I'm in. I've done lots, well, not lots, but I've done quite a few competitions in terms of the weekends, but I've also done a national, and I'm looking that I want to go to the World Championships. At the minute, there's too much of a jump for me to go in because of F4H, you could say, because though you could take an ARTF into that at the minute, because of the 2-to-1 scoring, if I remember right, I could do terrible on the static and not really be that competitive in terms of if I lose loads of marks in the static. What I think it should be more like, this new class, is more of a transitional class, you know, similar to what they have within motorsport, you know, Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1, in that you slowly build up to it. Obviously, the Formula 1 in this is the F4C. The Formula 3 of what we're proposing would be this new class. And I think it's a good, how we're setting it up. If we did a 10 kilo limit, it's not going massively over the top to F4C, but it's bringing the people that are already, you know, they've done a national or two, they've done a few competitions, they sort of know where they are with it. It allows me, for example, I'm going to try and build something for it, but I may build over the 7 kilos purely because I may not be the greatest builder. It may turn out a bit heavy. So the 10 kilos gives you a little bit of side to side, you know, to play with. But it's also the fact of if you're using it as a transitional class, you're trying to move, you're trying to go, right, you've got a footing, you've got your foot in the door, you can go have an experience of it, and you're not going to lose much for it. And if you're in this transitional class, in theory, you shouldn't be going against world champions, etc. It's the junior class within the whole world championship thing. So it's kind of like, as I say, it's a Formula 3 to Formula 1. You know, you've done well, you've worked to get there. So with the Formula 1, you've been karting before. So you've done the circuit, you know, the sort of competitions. Whereas this one's a transitional. This is to get your foot in the door, then try and move up to F4H and F4C. Because at the minute, going from nationals to F4H, if you've only ever done the flying only at the nationals and you're not really a builder, you've kind of got nothing to get your foot onto. Whereas at least with this one, we're opening the opportunities up. And then we're also increasing the base of what we can, sort of the talent pool we can go from. And in terms of putting this back to national level, you know, how are these rules going to apply nationally? It basically kind of morphs into flying only. For nationals, you could, I don't know, you can scrap the static side. I mean, there's not much effort to do it, but you can scrap the static side and the rules would still apply as if it was flying only. And it would kind of give some official legitimacy to flying only in the UK. I mean, I don't think it's total newbies, but I don't think it's total experts either. I don't think we should be aiming for the sort of the 20 kilo up, but we should be aiming as a transitional class more than total newbies, if you can see where I'm getting from.
The chairman is doing this. I think well spoken. It's his name. That must be the purpose, because I think if you go to a World Championships, when you come back home, the first thing you will think of is building a new model and getting better, because everybody who's been to a World Championship seems to enjoy that. So to attract, let's say, not new beginners, but to attract novice scale modelers to go to a huge competition will always give them a boost, in my mind. And to be honest, we have talked also about that the World Championships, we need more competitors. Actually, for the 2020, that should be in this summer, it was 87 entries, and that's quite not that bad. But if we can have a novice open scale competition going along that, it will maybe attract 45 more. And like you said, when you have been there once and see how it is. I think it gives a boost to the novice guys to try to actually getting forward and maybe move through the classes, because that's my aim. I said, like you in 2016, I said we have to think about F4H as an entry class, because F4C is too complicated. F4H, I don't think it's very complicated, but like you said, there is still a lot of good people. So maybe we need, like you said, a Formula 3 class or a go-kart class, if you can say it that way.
Yeah, that's what I kind of, the only thing I can compare it to is the Formula Series, of where you've got 1, 2 and 3.
Yeah.
3 is where it's a transitional class from karting to proper motorsport. And it then allows you to jump between the 3 different ones you've got there. But you're still of a quality where you can compete on the world stage. But it allows people that are maybe the weekenders and the odd national to then kind of go, well, I want to put my foot in the door on this and I want to go for it.
Because the thing is, when it comes to our world championships, we will always have, or let's say usually, but we usually have enough pilots to make a competition. It haven't, except Romania in 2016, most of the championships have been well entered, actually. I could wish for more nations, of course, outside Europe, but that's another thing. But nationally, around the world, we need a little increase of numbers. I think like Norway and also Sweden and Denmark and a lot of countries, they have maybe 10 skill pilots. UK is a different story, but if you go to, let's say, Norway, I had a competition 3 weeks ago. It was 8 entries in F4H and 3 entries in F4C. If I could get 7 or 8 novice pilots doing a entry class, if 1 or 2 of them moves forward to F4H, that will be great. And if 1 or 2 of the F4H pilots go to F4C, that would be even more great. That's the only way we can get people into scale competitions, in my mind. But yeah.
Yeah, David?
I think your idea is good.
David?
Just trying to unmute myself. Yeah, just a couple of points really. Just picking up on what Ben was saying, and also just again trying to make it even more simple. We're looking at these sort of looking at weights, but how about having a target weight where, okay, ideally, you're aiming to produce a model of say 7.5 kilograms or something like that, but the competitor's not going to worry if it happens to be 8 kilograms or 7 kilograms or something like that. But there's a sliding scale of penalty points. Let's say if you're, 7.5 kilograms plus or minus half a kilogram, does it really matter that you're dead on the weight? And that, for me, would simplify things quite a bit more. The competitor wouldn't necessarily worry about hitting a weight. So that's one point. The other point was one of promotion, really. None of you know me really, or at all, apart from Graham and maybe Danny, but I'm a relative newcomer to all of this, and I came into the hobby really because I like aircraft, but also started off going to various air shows, and the area that attracts most attention is really the air show side of things, and let's say if you look at Barkston, you've got the air show side of things, you've got the other competitors, maybe control line and stuff like that, and scale happens somewhere over there, and so maybe the answer is also one of promotion as well. Say, not just thinking of Barkston here, but let's say if you had a an enthusiastic team, for instance, that would go round demonstrating, that scale competitions is not an old, not the preserve of old stuffy scale modelers, and look what we can do. Look what the scale's all. Look what the competition's all about. It's about having well, you could go the whole hog and have a really scale model, F4C, or you can have an almost scale model, and the rules are much slacker. But even so, it's still just to go around and demonstrate it really for the general public, and also RC flyers who maybe think scale happens somewhere over there in the opposite side of the airfield and doesn't really affect us.
Yeah, Ben, you've made another really good point there. I like about the fact that scale is not the TJD Reno racers that people think it is. I like that one. Chris, do you want anything? And then
what attracted me was David's suggestion of a weight limit and then a sliding scale of penalty points if you can't achieve it. I quite like that. If you're going to have a new class to attract new competitors, and Ben's already alluded to this, why not make it open to anybody, but you face a penalty if you can't hit the weight limit. That's an idea which I hadn't really thought about until until David just raised it just now. I mean, as he says, he's a relative newcomer, and as Andy's already alluded to, we should be quizzing the newcomers here, not the old dyed-in-the-wool people like me who've been trying to do this for years, and perhaps running a bit dry on new ideas. I don't know, but
so I know my son would be interested in entering a scale competition, but I also know he'd be kind of worried about hitting some kind of weight limit. Whereas if he's got there's a target, but he's not going to be worried about hitting 7.5 kilograms, smack on, or being slightly under it, 7.4 kilograms, or 7.49 kilograms. If he's 8 kilograms, he's not going to be worried. He's going to say, okay, I'm there or thereabouts.
Yeah,
I'll enter.
I mean,
right?
There are no prescribed limits currently apart from the maximum, and if you can't get your model under that limit, then you can't speak.
Well, so if you're 7.6 kilograms,
The only penalty you're against if you build light is that you run the risk of having a lighter, smaller model, which doesn't create such a good impression. I mean, everybody in the scale world who's been there for any length of time cannot deny the fact that a big model is more impressive to watch and will generally get, shall we say, more favorable results from the judges, or a lot of the judges, than a smaller model. And it's true that a bigger model will be less prone to being beaten around by the elements as well. So there's lots of benefits in building a big model, which is why the experienced scale flyers will always try to build up to the maximum weight limit.
But if that sliding scale was, I don't know, somebody could go and say, okay, I'm going to build a model 15 kilograms and still enter, but the penalty scale is such that there's no way you're going to win. At that, it's going to favour somebody who's closer to the 7.5 kilograms, for instance. That solves that problem.
Well, that's something we could do domestically, or we could certainly think about it. I don't know. Is Andy still around? What do you think, Andy? Do you think we could we could perhaps think about that from our own light scale point of view.
That's also the point.
I'm reluctant to do it on light scale because the light scale was aimed at the club modeler.
Yeah.
And a couple of people wrote to me and said, well, can you increase it to 7.5? And as soon as you start increasing it and allowing bigger numbers, you're going to get bigger models in.
Yeah, but if they suffer...
I know, but there's no... I'm reluctant to put it in for light scale, but if you're going to put a new class in, then it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's take it out of this meeting. It's a good idea. There's no doubt about that. Take it out of the meeting, and we can put it into the STC menu.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we could probably go on for about another hour on this, but I've got lots of brilliant input, but I just want a couple of summary ones. So Adrian Hayward, if you want to make your points, and then if I can ask Gwyn to summarise his comment as well that he put in the chat window, and then we'll call it quits for tonight. And I've got a lot of writing to do to summarise all the input that we've had this evening. So Adrian,
if I'm just can you hear me? Hopefully.
Yeah. Got you.
As somebody who is a newbie into the scale side of things, it is a most daunting concept to look at the names, certainly in the UK, that fly the scale competitions. You think, where the heck am I even going to get? You're a non-starting before you start flying. There needs to be some way that the newcomer can feel that they've got a chance of progressing instead of just being the also-rans. The idea of, say, a 7.5, 10 kilo limit, where limited documentation, it makes it a lot simpler and a lot easier for somebody to grasp what is needed and to get on the first rungs of the ladder. Once they're in there, then they will progress, I'm sure. I see a couple of guys I'm trying to get into scale, they won't do it simply because, well, we can't compete. And that's it. We've destroyed the whole object of what we want to try and do.
Good point.
Cool. And then Gwyn, do you want to?
Yeah, just briefly.
Summarise.
Just briefly, I run our competitions here in New Zealand, and we're always trying to get new people in. But I think this discussion is really good. It's brought up some really good ideas. But I think the reality of it is that we're pretty much sort of agreed on our flying rules work to a point. I think that if we can finesse what's required for a static requirement for this group, then the weight really doesn't matter. It's really a matter of, we've got a worldwide structure for an entry level of a competition, and it's up to the national bodies and whatnot to decide whether they want to use 5 kilos, 7 kilos, or just leave it open to 20 kilos plus. I just think it just give it a chance to grow. You're never going to invent the perfect scale class to enter, but at least if you put a framework in place of the basics, then each of the national bodies can try and work it and finesse it and go from there. That's just my thoughts. We're never gonna invent the perfect thing after one Zoom meeting, but if there's a framework there, then there's no reason why it can't be worked on and adjusted and moved up. Less rules are better.
Right, thank you, Gwyn. Good summary at the end. It saves me doing it. Thanks everyone for all your input tonight. It's the first time I've ever sort of attempted anything like this within the sort of CIAM rule structure. It's also the first time I've attempted to do this sort of open forum discussion on Zoom, and I must admit I need to have a heavier hand in the future to try and control when people are just speaking, and some using chat, some raising their hands. So I've learned lessons from that as well. So thank you everyone. final point is next Zoom session is Wednesday, October the 14th, and our speaker is online tonight. So Mike Smith, do you want to say a little bit about what you're going to talk about in 2 weeks' time?
Am I there? Yes. Get on with. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about my snipe and my DH4 and all the various aspects that are involved in free flight scale. Very much at the other end of the scale of what I've heard tonight.
Yeah.
At a maximum weight, sort of 1 kilo. So, so it's a bit different.
So yeah, that'll be a different sort of insight.
That is not the other end of the spectrum.
No, pistachio.
I think also for the whole subcommittee, because there is a lot of them on here, this type of forum is quite good. So I think we should have some topics now and then, because I think it gives us quite good input. Agreed, Gwen?
Yeah.
And Chris?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we should, if we continue with this BMFA scale things meetings on Zoom, I think from time to time it should be a sort of open forum on slightly different topics, because it's good to share ideas and thoughts.
Oh, that saves me finding a speaker for one of them every so often. Great.
So thanks everybody for all the good inputs. I think it's great.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Graham. Good night.
Cheers. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Graham. Oh, sorry, good morning. Me.
Good.
Sleep well, everybody.
And I'll email you, Adrian.
Did you get my email?
Yeah, I got it.
Brilliant. Still got the air modeler with the front cover picture of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know the one. Great.
Great times.
Yeah. Okay. Cheers.
Okay, cheers. I'll catch you later.
Yep.